how's it going, Exile? So you have been waiting for it, and here's the full build guide for my planned Cast on Crit Oracle build. And we're gonna start with a showcase of some bosses and other content. So what you're looking right now is a random 25 million HP Citadel boss. So currently the build has like roughly 1 to 2 million DPS depending on the kind of setup and the boss. Next here we have some tier 2 Simulacrum. I didn't try tier 3 Simulacrum yet because I just can't afford it right now, and there's a pretty high risk that I die and I will just use all my investment. Next up, here's just some random map bosses. They usually melt within like 1 to 3 seconds depending on the boss and the setup again. The build has some drawdowns against very mobile bosses. It more accelerates in stationary bosses, but you will have no issues dealing with the mobile bosses as well, but you might have to move your ass a little bit while playing. Next up we have tier 3 Xesht. So the problem with tier 3 Xesht is, since we have like the immune ability phases and this build is definitely not a one shot and done deal, you will have to, do the mechanics a little bit. The boss might, dunk away once in a while and you have to follow it and stuff like that. So it's really not like you're just, standing in front of the boss and killing it within 1 second. That shit doesn't work anymore unless you have like a really, really broken build. And this build is just solid, but definitely not broken. But you can still deal with all the tier 3 content just fine, as you can see. Next we are looking at some high Delirium, fully juiced Abyss content. So this is pretty much the hardest content you can play in the game. It has like a tremendous amount of rare mobs. They are highly juiced with the Delirium mechanics and all they have manifested Delirium on them. So this is definitely something you have to be a little bit conservative, but the great thing about this build is you can just, throw your plants and then you can always back off and, let the plants deal the damage. So it's overall pretty secure unless you run into like some crazy insta-gibbing mechanic. But this content is very hard at this stage, so if you just want to run regular maps, just zooming through them, you will absolutely have a great time playing this build. If you want to play the hardest content, this build definitely has a ceiling, but it can deal with all content, but it's definitely not the strongest build I have ever played. Alright, now while we're looking at the non-delirious regular map and see how we just, walk through it like it's nothing, let's just talk a little bit about, the build and what this guide is going to include. So first of all, finally, Paths of Building has been updated. So we have Paths of Building, which is inside the planner in the description down below. So you will also find all the links to all the sections of this guide, the skill tree, the showcases and whatnot in the description down below. We have the full showcase of the Delirious Abyss map. We have the full showcase of the tier 3 Xesht. We have the last 2 wave of tier 2 Simulacrum. And I leave you the full fight for the Stone Citadel and also the full regular Ravine map you're seeing right now. So I'm also playing this build live on stream right now. I will move on to a different build though very soon, so I highly recommend you check out the stream so you can ask me your questions about this build. Also highly recommend to like and subscribe for more content of this channel. But now without further ado, let's go into the actual guide and let's start with the skill gems. Alright, so let's go over the skill gems. We have a couple of different options here and I will explain them as best as possible. But first of all, we have like this power siphon here. I just use it to like stash some gems for a weapon swap here, like you don't need the skill at all. Then we have Sigil of Power and we use it with prolonged duration and magnified area for boss fights and, stationary encounters, which is in our weapon swap. Then our first main skill is our spammable skill, which is Entangle. So this is basically the skill we spam all the time. It's going to spawn these vines, they're auto-target and stuff like that, yada yada yada. And we have like 2 setups here basically. So my first setup is I'm using this with mobility. This is basically for mapping so I can run more fluent. And the only thing I change really in a boss is I change mobility for heft. So as you can see in a boss setup I do like 40k sheet DPS. And in a mapping setup I do like 34k sheet DPS. So we run it with rapid casting, mobility or heft. Then we have accelerated growth, we have branching fissures, and we have brutality 3. So accelerated growth is very important. I know it doesn't give raw damage, but don't skip it because actually the explosions from it do not matter so much from the damage, but it does apply blind. So just keep that in mind. Accelerated growth will do blind because we need that for our next skill. So Then next thing we have is Thrashing Vines. This is for single target, this is for rares, this is also great for Abyssal pits. You can just put it on the pit and the bosses are spawning, are directly basically getting demolished by the Thrashing Vines. And we run this with pretty much as much damage as humanly possible. So we run this with Brutality 3, we run this with Heft, we run this with Concentrated Area, we run this with Considered Casting, so this is like all the damage gems basically existing for this. And then last but not least, we run it with Blindside, which gives us 15% more crit damage and 15% more crit damage bonus. So keep in mind, this is more, so this is multiplicative. Why, again, Blindside? So it only works against blinded enemies. So again, let's look at our accelerated growth. This will blind enemies on hit. Right, so then we have Cast on Critical. People are playing a couple of different setups. I tried a lot of them. So first of all, most people play Thunderstorm on this Cast on Critical, which for me is just a pure quality of life thing, because Thunderstorm has a limit of 1. So if you put it on Cast on Crit, you're really not getting any benefit out of this. It's just gonna, you know, spawn a Thunderstorm somewhere, then the next second it's gonna spawn it somewhere else, and it's gonna despawn it. So the only quality of life I see in this is in boss fights, because, you know, in a boss fight, this will constantly spawn the Thunderstorm on the boss, and especially if bosses are moving, if you're manually casting Thunderstorm, you have to recast it whenever the boss repositions itself. So if you put your Thunderstorm inside your Cast on Critical, you don't have to do this, right? So it basically automatically repositions. But you're gonna lose a lot of damage on your Cast on Critical. Also, your Cast on Critical is gonna cast much less, because now it has to cast 2 spells instead of 1. So in my setup, I just run a second Entangle in my Cast on Critical. I felt like on a map, this gives me a lot much more clear, and I felt like also the damage of this is pretty good. What you also can do is you can run a Bone Cage in this. So this was actually the first thing I tried with this, because Bone Cage does very high single target damage. And if you look at Bone Cage, it has a critical hit chance of 15%. So this is basically the highest base critical hit chance a spell can have, right? For example, our other spells have 10%. So this basically has like 50% more crit built in. So this actually has a very strong critical strike chance if you use it in the skill. However, this drains your mana like crazy. So you need like really strong mana sustain to use this, and by using the plants, it has just a much lower mana cost, because the plants natively have 50% less mana cost from our passive 2, which we're gonna get into later. So you can run this, but this is gonna drain your mana like crazy, so you have to try this. This is gonna give you a little bit more single target damage than the Entangle will do. This is not gonna really help you with map clear, but the Entangle will help you with map clear. So, you know, you kind of have to, you know, make a choice. And also, you know, if you're lazy, you can definitely just, you know, take some support gem like the Armor Break out, for example, and, you know, just put the Thunderstorm together within here. Like, you kind of have to try it out what you like best. I like the setup best, where I just have the Entangle in here, and I use it with Armor Break. So this just helps me to break armor of mobs a little bit faster without sacrificing damage from my main skill. We use Boundless Energy, so it procs more often. We use Brutality 3 for more damage, and we use Efficiency 2. Again, mana cost is crazy high on Cast on Critical. On bosses, this casts like 10 times a second. So you have to reduce the cost, otherwise it's just going to drain everything, your complete mana, and you're not going to be able to do shit. Then we have Thunderstorm, as I already told. I'm self-casting it. This does not do any damage. You don't have to have it on like level 18. You can put it on lower level, but for me it doesn't really matter. The mana cost is low enough, and I mainly use it to shock and obviously water the plants. So I'm using it with Shock Conduction 2. So what it says is, you know, hits from supported skills always shock drenched targets, and Thunderstorm will drench targets. So that's pretty much the story. Like, if you use this gem, this is gonna have a 100% shock chance. Then Rapid Casting 2 on it is just for like quality of life reasons. Prolonged Duration, again, quality of life. And Living Lightning 2. Why Living Lightning 2? If you look at our passive tree, we have Impale, so this is like 30% chance on Impale. And how Impale works, it basically, you know, takes some of the mitigated damage by armor and, you know, stacks it into a like an Impale buff or whatever. And then you need to extract the Impale to do damage. Extracting the Impale can only be done with physical hits. So Living Lightning basically creates minions which do physical hits, and they can extract your Impale for some extra damage. Then we have Vulnerability. This is, classic Curse in Weapon Set 2. We run it with Haten Curse, Curse Ground, Prolonged Duration, and Magnified Area. Then Convalescence. This is our last spell, which gives you just crazy survivability in all energy shield builds. We use it with Cooldown Recovery 2, Prolonged Duration 2, and rapid casting for quality of life. And then I have Clarity 2 in here. So if you can fit the spirit to, run a Clarity 1 or a Clarity 2 in this, it's nice, because again, this build is crazy mana hungry. If you cannot fit this in, not a big deal. It will still work without Clarity just fine. So that's everything about the skill gems. So let's go on with the items. Alright, let's look at the items. So you basically have two different ways of playing this regarding the weapons. So you can either play Wand and Focus, or you can play Stuff. So if you want to play a Stuff, it's the cheapest option if you're on a budget. You can get crazy good stuffs, like, this is not even a good one. You can get like triple prefix damage technically. Like you can also get like, increased physical damage and whatever, like spell physical damage or spells which cost life. You can really get like up to 600% more, like, not more, you can get up to 600% damage in your prefixes, and the suffixes also can be very strong. They can have like high crit rolls, high cast speed rolls, stuff like that. They can roll like up to like 60% cast speed, and you can simply slam the +5 level of all skills using a perfect essence of sorcery, which basically costs nothing. So in a cheap setup, a Stuff is definitely the best, and also if you have a high budget, a Stuff will also be the best, because you can really reach crazy damage numbers with the Stuff. You're gonna sacrifice some of your defensive from your focus, obviously, but this really allows you to go for crazy high damage. Also, you have 2 sockets instead of 1, so you can get 48% increased critical chance instead of just 24. So high budget option would be a Stuff, and low budget often would be a Stuff. So, since I'm mostly running maps, my setup is kind of a medium setup. So I run a physical spell wand. It's nice to have spell damage, cast speed. It would be nice to have crit chance on here. I have gain damage as physical is also nice. So this is a decent wand, but not very good. I have been having this since like day 1. I got this for relatively cheap. But yeah, look for like a Stuff. You can also get like a +4 Stuff, not a big deal with better stats. So look for something like that. Then we have our focus. Basically just focus on +2 spell level. Get some cast speed and high energy shield. Everything else is pretty much bonus here. For Amulet, you want to have +2 spell skills. You can get +3, but it's crazy expensive. You can also take +1 if you're on a budget. It's gonna work just fine. You need like 30+ spirit. Actually, you need like 25+ spirit, but usually we'll have 30+ spirit. Everything else will be a bonus. So as you can see, I have already 8 left. So if I had like 41 spirit on this, I could still run my, Clarity 2 in my support gems. Besides that, really, I'm looking for mana and really anything good, but if you want to have like stuff like cast speed or critical on this, it's just gonna get crazy expensive. So I'm kind of just focusing to have the +2 level of all spell skills and some rarity here. For our rings, I'm looking for mana and mana regeneration mainly, and fixed resistances and some rarity, so this is a decent ring. If you have a good amount of money, you can go for cast speed on top of this. So my other ring here, for example, is not a breach ring, but it's also like, having mana, cast speed, all res, mana regeneration. So, just try to fix some resistances, some mana, some cast speed with your rings. As for your helmet, you just want as much energy shield as possible. You can go for like a 30+ rarity with a little bit less energy shield, or you can go for a regular one with like rarity and high energy shield, and just try to fix some resistances on it. That's going to be just fine. For our boots, I self-crafted these. These are pretty cheap to craft. I'm just using 30% movement speed boots with some resistances and, 60% increased effect of socketed items. And then I socket in the Kurgal's Gaze here, which basically gives me 24% increased mana cost efficiency if you haven't dodge rolled recently. So don't dodge roll. If you dodge roll all the time, if you have like nervous finger on your spacebar, don't use this rune. But if you don't need to dodge roll all the time, this is really good. Mana cost efficiency is actually very important. As for a helmet, also I have a mana cost efficiency rune in here. Then for the gloves, you can use Night Scale. It's really good to fix your mana. You can buy one with 2 sockets for relatively cheap. You don't have to do it, but the 2 socket ones are relatively cheap. Just look for like 40% plus crit and try to get high cold res on it. And then you can use 2 sockets to further fix your resistances. These give you like a very high mana regeneration rate. You don't have to do this if you have like crazy good mana regeneration on your rings and maybe like another roll on your focus or wand. You could skip these, but again, the build is crazy mana hungry for bosses. If you're mainly just mapping, you don't even need these, but for bosses you really need a high mana regeneration. And for the belt, you can either use just a regular belt with mana and resistances on, or you can use an ingenuity. They are fairly cheap. You can get them for like 40x or something like that with like 55% plus. You don't have to get like a crazy one. These are already good. This is going to boost your ring, so it's a little bit better than a regular ring, regular belt, I would say. But it's not crazy if you don't have like a very high rolled one. However, if you choose to get an ingenuity, be very sure that you get increased charm, increased charges gained. If you have reduced charges gained, your charms won't work. Sorry, used. I'm sorry. So you have to get reduced charges used, not increased charges used. If you have increased charm charges used, by the way, you can use my trade link in the description to get the correct one. But if you have increased charm charges used, like this charm, for example, right, has 40 or 40 charges. If it has increased charm charges used, it needs like 50 charges on use, and it cannot trigger ever at all. So that's very important. If we buy Ingenuity, make sure to get one which has reduced charm charges used, not increased. And then, you know, as for our charms, I'm running the Nask and Hope here, which is like nice to give me some freeze immunity. I'm running the Forsaken Bangle here for, like, you know, extra Chaos Rest, because my Chaos Rest is terrible. I'm just running a random gold charm right now. For a flask, you want to have an instant recovery flask with increased charges, and you want to have like an increased amount mana flask with increased charges as well. Alright, the passive tree. So first of all, the lesser harm. This is basically going to make all hits against you unlucky. This basically translates to like a 33% damage reduction from all hits. This is like just crazy strong defensively. Then we have forced outcome. So what this gives you is inevitable critical hits. So basically meaning your critical hits reroll like they reroll once again with 30% less critical damage bonus if they don't crit. So this basically gives you a 100% crit chance to trigger your cast on critical, but this also means speccing into crit is going to be much more effective. Obviously, if you had a 100% crit chance, this would do nothing. But if you are like at roughly like 40 or 50 or maybe even 60% crit chance, this is actually pretty strong, because, you know, your first roll is basically going to say, okay, I crit anyway. But if your roll doesn't crit, you get like a second one, and you can still, you know, get the high crit damage with, like, you know, just a 30% less. So this really gives you like a pretty good chance to, you know, still get a good chunk of your crit damage in case you don't crit. So it's really not just for having 100% crit for the cast on critical. It really also does damage if you have decent critical strike stats. Then we have the Unseen Path. This basically opens like all these crazy Oracle nodes here. And then last but not least, we have Enwind Realities. It's not a big deal if you don't have your Force Ascendancy yet. We don't use this, we don't make like very crazy use in this of this in this build. But, you know, let me just, so this basically gives you a medium radius on keystones, and you can allocate skills. So the way we use it in this build is basically, you know, we use this Elemental Equilibrium. We don't use this at all. We don't play infusions, but we can use it to pick this 20% node, this node, and this node. And then we have also this Black Flame Covenant here. Again, we don't use this. We don't have any fire damage, whatever. But we use this to get Sudden Escalation, which is a pretty nice crit node. And we use it to get Cut the Bone, which gives us Armor Break, which is also pretty nice. And then we also have this node here, which is Wild Surge Incarnation, and we can use this to get these two nodes and this one in weapon set 2 for like some extra area of effect. So it's not crazy strong, it just does it a little bit, but it's definitely not mandatory to have this. It works just fine without. Then we basically just pass here through getting all the damage. We're getting all this damage and the hinder effect here. Then we are going down here, getting like all the crit. We get all like the movement speed here. We get even more crit. We get the jewels. We get this crit cluster down here. Then we get this crit cluster. We get the mana cost efficiency, and we get here this Aspiring Genius, which gives us Arcane Search basically. There's a 10% chance to gain Arcane Search when we crit, and we always crit, obviously. Then we have this wheel, which just gives like a good amount of critical physical damage. This one we already talked about, Impale and extracting it with the Living Lightning. This is just some big skill effect duration, which is always nice to have. Here we get extra physical damage, basically. This is a nice energy shield, a mana node. We get this big energy shield cluster here. And, you know, that's pretty much all the nodes we are already speccing. So we're like relatively heavily into like this oracle tree here. And then for our weapon sets, we mainly have like all the crit stuff in weapon set 1, and in weapon set 2, we basically just branch out here to get like all these curse nodes to make our curses more powerful. And we get like some spell area of effect here and here in our secondary weapon set. So one thing you can do, if you have a stuff which, you know, gives you damage with spells which cost life, so like this one here, for example, right? Which gives you like the increased spell damage with spells that cost life, which is a desecrated mod. It's super easy to put on any weapon, and you know, it's actually quite potent. What you can do is you basically spec this one, life, spell damage, and cost. This basically gives you, you know, 6% converted cost, so it really doesn't matter. It only takes like 10 or 15 life per cast. You really just have to, you know, press a flask like once every 20 seconds or whatever, or just have like some regeneration with vitality or whatever. And then you pick this node here. This gives you like an extra 40% increased damage. So this is a pretty nice synergy here if you have spells which use life. Alright, as for the jewels, you want to have one jewel which has maximum mana on kill. This is basically going to give you infinite mana on mapping, so it's a really, really nice quality of life to have this. And besides that, you want to have like stats like critical strike damage, critical strike chance, energy shield regarding stuff, or skill effect duration. So if you look at my other jewels, for example, this one has, you know, maximum energy shield, critical strike bonus, another critical strike bonus, and energy shield recharge rate. So this is a pretty nice one. Then we have one here which has maximum energy shield, critical hit chance for spells, increased skill effect duration. Then we have one more, which is, you know, energy shield, critical hit chance, second critical hit chance, and faster start of energy shield recharge. I have a link in the description down below for the jewels with the weighted sum where you can just put in your budget and, you know, just sort by the sum, and you can find like the best jewels which kind of fit in your build. But really try to get, you know, maximum energy shield pretty much on every jewel. It's gonna like very, very nice defensive layer with it. And then just try to get like critical strike stats on top of it. Also, as for the Anoint, right now I'm anointing Cooked. So this is basically for like boss damage. This is like one of the strongest nodes you can get. It gives you 60% increased critical damage bonus, but it takes 25% of your defenses. So first of all, this is important, expensive to anoint, so, you know, I'm not going to recommend doing that. And also, if you look at this, we have like 5.6k energy shield. Basically, if I take this off, I'm going to jump up to like 6.1. So this actually makes up for a fairly good amount of energy shield, so you definitely do not recommend to do this unless you know what you're doing. Other stuff you can basically do is, if you're not on a budget, you can do Throat Seeker here for 30% crit bonus, but 20% less chance, which is nice and Anoint. If you're a little bit more on the budget side, you know, you can definitely also get, you know, efficient casting for some mana cost efficiency here. A good option is also a defensive option you can anoint here is the Ancient Aegis, which is kind of cheap, which gives you, you know, 60% more energy shield from body armor, which is pretty neat. And, you know, other stuff is also, you can get these True Strike here, which is 20% increased critical hit chance, which is also pretty cheap. And, you know, there's a couple of other nodes you can get, but this is mainly what I recommend to get for the Anoint here. Alright, how do you use my trade links? For all my build guides, I post trade links, so you can pretty much exactly buy the gear I have, but you can adjust it to your budget, and I have pretty easy methods to do this. So first of all, if you are on the Mobalytics guide, always just click on the How It Works section. In the How It Works section, it actually will show you trade links. This is not complete yet, but it's going to be complete once the video is uploaded. But let's take this example. There is going to be a wand. So you click on the wand, and now you get the trade link. And if you have the trade link now, basically you're just going to see shit in the beginning. So how it works is I always use weighted sums. So this one, for example, has a weighted sum which has all the stats which are good for us inside. and it's basically automatically handling the work. However, there's a couple of things you need to adjust accordingly. First of all, if you have a maximum level, put your maximum level in. Second of all, put your budget. So if your budget is not 400 Exalted Orb equivalent, which is like 4 divines right now for a wand, so let's say yours is just 100, right? So you just adjust it accordingly. And then you order by the weighted sum. So you click on this sum here, and now you will see the best one for your build at the very top. So this has the highest sum of everything for you. So you can see for just 50 exalts, you get this wand with +5 physical, with cast speed, with spell damage, with extra cold damage, with maximum mana, and with mana per enemy killed. And you can just scroll down and find whatever fits best your build. But usually you can blindly trust these weighted sums unless you're like looking for something specific. Maybe you want to fix your mana regen, so you always might want to, for example, if you really are low on mana regeneration, you might, add an extra stat to your sum that it has to have mana regeneration, so you will now only find the one which fits your budget best, but has mana regeneration in this case instead of cast speed. So this is basically how I use my trade links. So first step, always make sure to fill in the budget you want to pay for this item, then order by the weighted sum and potentially put in your level. This is for weapons and jewelry, and then sometimes if you want to buy armor pieces, there's always going to be one more condition, which is going to be energy shield. So this, for example, is the focus, right? If you don't have a budget of 200 or whatever, let's say you have a budget of 100 for the focus. Again, here you can see focus matching the query. And if these are too expensive, let's say you're like on a budget, right? You only want to spend like 10x. You can even find one here, so this might be good for you. But let's say this doesn't fit you. For armor pieces, you might want to reduce the energy shield, which I always include here. So you might go down to like 250 now, and now you will find like a lot of foci which basically fit your budget. So this build is really pretty budget friendly, so you can just buy like these for like 10 exalts each if you just, go down on the energy side a little bit. But this is how you use my trade links.
A druid knows to travel light. for every contingency.
But yeah, so the bosses are like a big problem because I just can't see them. So I rather like play it safe and just, you know, run around until, you know, stuff gets cleared. Because, you know, these bosses are usually not so dangerous if you just run in a circle around them.
Can I carry anymore?
But yeah, I think for the next tier, I would not be strong enough at this point. Also, the risk of, you know, you just have one dash, basically, losing everything on a single dash. I think that the risk would be a little bit too high for me to do that, even though I don't even have the currency anyway.
Memory and madness both. Believe me, you will. Wild take Exile. Wild take it. I'm not ready yet.
Oh gosh. Okay. I mean, this is like just completely glitching out. I wonder if these die while I'm dead. Oh. Okay, so now this is a little bit of an issue, I guess. Actually, it's okay. I expected this to be more dangerous. But yeah, the visual clarity on this build is just so horrible. And of course we get the good.
It seems we must wait a little longer for Sal.